cartoons from present and the past. Every week will be an animated bash. What a cartoon! What a cartoon! Maybe a short but mostly shows. We'll talk, we'll analyze, exploring as we go. What a cartoon! What a cartoon! What a cartoon! What a cartoon!
Hello, everybody, and welcome to What a Cartoon, where we constantly say the word spider blood. I'm your host, Bob Mackey, the man whose webbing dissolves in an hour, and this is an audio exploration of every cartoon ever. Who is here with me today?
Henry Gilbert, and too bad none of Spider-Man rubbed off on me.
Oh, boy.
Wow, this is adult.
And who else? Sorry.
This is Gary Butterfield, who owns rare bootlegs of Question Mark and the Mysterios.
Wow, so this is already a filthy episode. Get the kids out of the room. I know everyone gathers around the radio to listen to the podcast together about cartoons. But yes, today's episode is Spider-Man, the animated series is The Menace of Mysterio.
Spider-Man, he's robbing us. Why? Couldn't be. See for yourself.
Today's episode aired on February 25th, 1995, and we are hitting Spider Country. Roll up your windows, folks. We're in Spider Country.
Yes, humble listeners, if you don't know, I am a big Spider-Man fan. Bob, I think, is indifferent towards him.
Henry has an estate in Spider Country, I believe. Henry,
yes.
Gary has a summer cottage.
I do summer in Spider Country.
I am a Spider-Man expert. I have been a Spider-Man superfan since 1991 or so, and pretty much have read every issue of Amazing Spider-Man that's come out since then. I've watched every Spider-Man movie, seen every Spider-Man cartoon. He's my favorite superhero, and I know I sound like a child saying that, but he's really cool. It's Spider-Man, right, Gary?
I'm with you. I'm with
Yeah.
you. I like this this role I have of being a pinch hitter for Spider-Man down in this is podcasting zone. Like, I like Spider-Man a lot. I know Bob doesn't.
I don't hate Spider-Man. I just have no Spider-Man opinions. I famously
You can't stay neutral on a moving spider, Bob.
well, if it's a spider that's not a man, I will destroy it. But if it was a spider that is a man, I will try to make some sort of pact, some non-aggression pact. Spider pact.
Spider pact.
Oh god.
Is he a threat or menace to you, Bob?
It depends on the Spider-Man. Listen, I'm getting confused by all these questions, but I did want to say that I am not super into American superheroes, everybody. That's how cool I am. But I did give this cartoon a try, and Batman the Animated Series tricked me into thinking I did like superheroes. It turns out I like film noir with weird mutants in it. So I watched this, and I'm like, this is ugly. Mm-hmm. It's not as beautiful as a Warner Brothers cartoon that Steven Spielberg winked at and made it special. So I avoided this altogether, and I only recently saw one Spider-Man movie. That was Spider-Man Homecoming. That's the only Spider-Man movie I've seen.
That's the only one. That's shocking. It's to be in the cultural zeitgeist, you've had to watch some of the
I'm
Spider-Man.
not in the cultural zeitgeist. That's why I'm broadcasting about That's why I'm podcasting about a 23-year-old cartoon.
That's right. Yeah. Yes. Let's get the plugs in early here, guys. If you don't listen to Retronauts, and you really should, you should start with the Spider-Man episode that I helped on.
Yes. Henry did all the heavy lifting on that one.
And well, Gary was there for that one too.
Yeah, that's right. Oh my God, the Spider Crew is assembled for this episode.
The Sinister 2.
And we went all over Spider-Man's video game history, and so figured we'd go a little into his animation history here. Now, we could have done the ridiculous original 60s show, but that's just too weird to even touch, and just
it's nice knowing that Ralph Bakshi had some stake in that show.
Yeah, and or we could have done the 1981 Spider-Man shows. There was the syndicated Spider-Man, and then there was Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, which for 80s television shows in the era of Hanna-Barbera, they weren't bad shows.
Spider-Man apologists.
They were some of the first Marvel production shows before they got into G.I. Joe or Muppet Babies.
Oh, Muppet Babies. Yeah, of course it ends with that famous, everything's famous today, but the Spider-Man logo, I didn't know what Spider-Man was. I thought that was so creepy as a kid, where Spider-Man comes down at the end.
It's a silvery chrome Spider-Man in 3D.
I want to do a Muppet Babies episode, or Tiny Fuppets. I know Gary's a huge fan.
If you do a Tiny Fuppets episode without me,
I was thinking
we might be done.
When
Bob.
When we hit web cartoons, I do want to do Tiny Fuppets. It's great. Look it up. It's a how would you explain it?
It's a like a parody is too too strong of a word. It's not really a parody. The idea is that this is Portugal's answer to the Muppet Babies.
And there are songs. It's all very poorly translated.
It's very poorly it gets a lot of translation humor, but that makes it sound worse than it is.
It sounds better than it is. But how did sorry, this is so off track. We haven't recorded one of these in like a month. But how did Marvel be associated with Muppet Babies?
Well, in the 70s, when Stan Lee left Marvel in New York City and was going to start a Marvel production office in LA in the 70s to make movies, which he never ended up making, and instead just made bad deals with filmmakers who would.
I would like to buy you magic beans.
But he had a little better luck in television, I think, because there's like maybe fewer bureaucratic assholes in there. But he started making deals with animation studios to create Marvel stuff because partially they had worked with Hanna-Barbera some on like Fantastic Four cartoons, but I think they realized they wanted to own the production themselves. So they started Marvel Animation with Spider-Man cartoons, which also then had guest stars. They were kind of trying to build a Marvel animated universe early on in there, because not just with Firestar and Iceman and Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, but Iron Man, the other X-Men appeared in it, and they fought a living video game in one episode, which was quite silly.
Wow.
But Muppet Babies.
Yes.
Wait.
I mean, Spider-Man is one of the thousands of reasons that Muppet Babies can never be sold again. No one is allowed to see it.
Well, so after they did the Spider-Man show, that's exactly the same time, and we will get into this in our G.I. Joe episode, but it was around the same time that the wall broke down for advertising cartoons advertising toys. So Mattel was already going to Marvel to do the comic book of G.I. Joe and also just write the universe of G.I. Joe. And since they were there, they're like, well, technically Marvel has an animation studio. Why don't they work on this? So Marvel Studios worked on that and also Transformers, and they made a deal with Jim Henson for Muppet Baby Comics, and it kind of avenued into that as well.
I remember Stan Lee showing up in Muppet Babies in a live action clip where he gets sprayed with silly string.
Yep.
And Spider-Man appears in live action, and I believe Ralph or one of them, a Muppet Baby, dresses up as Spider-Man in a parody of something.
That's in the classic Sunday Funnies episode of Muppet Babies, where it's just full of jokes about Dagwood and Beetle Bailey.
And Spider-Man is famously a Sunday funny.
Well, at the time, Stan Lee was doing, and I think still technically writes the Spider-Man comic strip. So they kind of grandfathered in there, like, yes, there's a Spider. It's as readable as Mary Worth. If you've ever read a Spider-Man comic strip, it is 3 panels. The first panel has to recap what happened in the last day.
Second panel is Spider-Man swinging to the third panel,
and then the third panel is a cliffhanger for the next comic strip, which will then be recapped tomorrow.
By the way, for all the folks at home, I was setting Henry up.
Thank you. But yes, they do all dress as Spider-Man, and then Stan Lee gets sprayed with silly string, and it was one of many, like, Muppet Babies was built on favors, so that's how they got to have all those characters in it. Spider-Man, who was created on August 10th, 1962, Amazing Fantasy 15 by Steve Ditko, the late Steve Ditko, and Stan Lee. They had all these adaptations of Spider-Man, but they kind of laid off of it into the late 80s, partially because they assumed, starting in 1985, there would be a Spider-Man film, and you need to do the film before you do a new cartoon show. So they kind of eased off of cartoon appearances for Spidey. But the film got stuck in such development hell for 15 years. At first, Golan and Globus was going to make it, and they only make shit, or only made shit.
Well, Golan does. Globus, don't do what Golan does. Do what Globus don't.
And you'll learn a little bit about the Spider-Man movie if you watch the Electric Boogaloo documentary about Golan and Globus. And then in the early 90s, they think James Cameron's going to make a film. At the same time, in 1992, Batman the Animated Series and X-Men the Animated Series premieres. And those are such mega hits. They are starting this whole new era in Saturday morning cartoons that it seems only natural that they'd give Spider-Man a cartoon, while they also figured we're starting on this cartoon, by the time we get it out, that James Cameron movie will be done and we'll tie into it. It wasn't just that Batman was huge, but it was like the X-Men animated series was a gigantic hit for Saban Entertainment and Chaim Saban. So he was already working with Marvel. So he said, hey, let's work on a Spider-Man show too, right? You're more of the X-Men animated series expert here, Gary.
Yeah. I mean, that's all right, though. That comports with things. And it, again, getting plugs out early. If you guys should never do an X-Men animated series
No.
episode, but if you ever do, like I'm your guy, and you can, people are listening. If you want more of that, you can listen to Days of Future Cast, which is my X-Men animated series show, which we ran out of track and got to the Avengers show they wanted to make in the wake of Spider-Man that they didn't make. That later came back as
Earth's Mightiest Heroes?
Not Earth's Mightiest Heroes, Avengers Assemble.
Oh, okay.
Which is terrible. It is the cheapest cartoon I've seen in my life. It is 20% armoring up sequences recycled from the title credits.
Well, that is cheap is the watchword for almost all Marvel animation, I have to say. Writing and voice acting can often uplift their bad animation, but it feels like they have it at best half the budget of Warner on Batman or Superman on their best day.
Yeah, somehow Muppet Babies got a lot more money.
Yes.
I guess the Henson, maybe it was another favor, an anime favor.
Well,
someone called in.
Well, Marvel did work with a lot of Japanese studios then, which they did on this too, and I'll get to that. But Chaim Saban is the middleman on this here, who was a huge cheapskate. Famously, he cut the pay on all the writers for the X-Men once the show was a success, because he's like, what, are you going to quit a successful show? I'll hire somebody cheaper. It was bad. He's a bad man. And Spider-Man had a similar cheapness to it. They worked with TMS, Tokyo Movie Shinsa, which, if you listen to our Batman episode, we can't stop praising TMS. Like, we love TMS. They're the greatest. They animated all the best episodes of Tiny Toons and Animaniacs.
Yeah, all the best Warner stuff was TMS, and they did so much work for Disney too.
What would TMS do if they had way less money?
Ooh.
And that's what this show is.
I was surprised. I didn't watch this show because I liked well-animated things, and this was very poorly animated. But going back to it now, it is sort of at the baseline level of a regular non-prestige cartoon of that era. It's not like what's a worse-looking cartoon from this era? Like
Hammerman.
something like that. Yeah. It's not as bad as that.
Or Yo-Yogi.
Yeah. I mean, there is some ambition, but like with a lot of these shows, like with the X-Men show, they never learn to simplify the character design. So everyone has too many lines, and they just don't look good moving. So they don't move them around a lot.
They're inconsistent because of that as well.
Yeah,
Too many
yeah.
lines. So you'll have characters that just look like, there'll be a cheap frame or cheap sequence where they take a lot of the lines out of the characters' faces, and all of a sudden you have like 15-year-old Rogue like making an appearance, like she's been de-aged off screen, the nanny's at foot, or something like that. And
no matter the studio, Spider-Man, I think he has one of the best costumes ever. I love that costume, red and blue, till the day I die. It is hell to animate. He's all lines moving.
Oh God, I didn't think of that.
It's hard enough for his regular artist to draw him correctly on every panel of a comic. Now have him moving and doing crazy actions.
Wow, yeah. I mean, so Matthew J., our friend, pointed out on an earlier episode that he was talking about Marvel comics of this era and that everyone is like over-designed. There's too many lines. Everybody looks very, very old.
Yes.
And I was thinking of that with this cartoon, and I wrote down, is Peter Parker 38? Is he in high school? Is he like a gym coach? What's happening here? I don't know where he is or what part of his life he's in.
Well, he's a student at Empire State University.
Okay,
Bob.
I thought maybe college, but he looks way too old. Again, too many lines on his face.
Well, that's kind of Spider-Man as well in casting for the longest time. This is one of the, I'll just say it now, Christopher Daniel Barnes, I really love him as Spidey.
Oh, the voice acting is great.
But they always cast Spidey too old. Like, he sounds too old in the 67 one, he sounds like a man in his 40s. In the cutscenes for the Spider-Man Sega CD game, he sounds so old. They don't understand that Spider-Man is a young man who needs to sound young.
Design-wise, I feel like he is too buff in a football player-y kind of way. Like, he should be muscular but also wiry, but I don't think they got that right until the movies that came out later, where he is just like a wiry but strong teenager.
Well, in here too, it feels a little bit like there's kind of a stock body type.
Yes.
Like these cartoons of this era had a real feeling of almost being made. I don't think they were designed this way, but like action figure first, and that like everyone's got an omni torso, and then they just replace the head.
Yeah, they're like crash test
Like
dummies.
why is Mysterio so cut?
Why is
Man,
J. Jonah Jameson as big as
Everyone is fucking ripped in this
He's an
show.
Adonis. Noted super hunk J. Jonah Jameson.
He's got some serious roid rage happening. I think that explains it.
Well, you mentioned the toys. That was another factor in the show, that they were planning the show in like 92, as early as 92, and they committed to a whole lot of toys that they were going to make. And then by the time they were trying to actually make the show, they're like, okay, time for Green Goblin. And they were told, no, Hobgoblin is in the first wave of toys, so it has to be Hobgoblin. Like,
2 goblins?
well,
There are so many goblins. Bob.
obvi-
You don't want to know how many goblins there are.
but obviously, canonically, Norman Osborn as the Green Goblin appeared 210 issues before the Hobgoblin
Wow.
ever appeared. So it shouldn't be the Hobgoblin first, and yet it was. So, and they were stuck with that. They were stuck with, they actually, the Vulture in this show, they completely redesigned him for the toys. And then in the comics, they gave him that same outfit because they're like, well, this is the toyetic design. He's going to be this now. Same with all the Spider Slayers, Spider-Man fights in the first season. It's just all these toys. They were handed, the writers of the show were handed the toys and told, make a show about these
Well,
toys.
that's a real 80s move.
Yeah. They were kind of stuck. And I bought every one of those toys I could get.
Wow.
It's like,
Did you have the Alistair Smythe toy with creepy back things?
hell yeah, his
Whatever.
back stuff, yeah.
His back stuff. That's pretty accurate.
Were they well-made toys?
Not as good as some of the Toy Biz line, but some were better than others. Though I preferred the Marvel Universe Toy Biz toys that were coming out around the same time. They had Spidey toys, and those reflect the simplified character designs of the show too much. So there's not as many features on Spidey, and he also has the very buff proportions, even though he should have more of an acrobat's build than a big buff man. But I still bought all of them I could as a kid, or had my mommy buy them. Well, and this came at the perfect time for me as a Spider-Man fan, because I got into it at the peak of the comics boom, like 1991, 92. So by 94, I was already a Spider-Man. Instead of being a kid, the type of 12-year-old who sees this and then buys Spider-Man comics, I already was the person who's like, well, I've read the Spider-Man comic this episode's based on, and I know the differences they're making.
How faithful were they, you guys?
Relatively, more than not.
Yeah, it depends on the storyline. Like for Days of Future Cast, we did the crossover X-Men episodes that are Secret Wars, and that's pretty messy. That's a pretty loose adaptation.
Yeah, well, they
But
could only get so many characters for Secret Wars, but yeah.
it just ends up being, and it ended up being like they're funny. Like they're not good, but you just end up with ludicrous things.
Yeah.
Like Dr. Octopus lands on a planet and then immediately robs a bank and just assumes there's a bank, like throws a car and then runs into a bank. It's like without saying anything.
Though one of the more accurate ones is the Venom 3-parter, which does the whole symbiote suit story from beginning to end except without the Secret Wars part of Spidey gets his suit.
He gets it on the moon, right?
No, a spaceship crashes onto a bridge and he gets gooed from the spaceship there.
Space goo.
And then the space goo takes over Hank Azaria's Eddie Brock /
Oh,
Venom.
wow.
I know.
They could afford Hank Azaria. Wow.
It's kind of shocking. They had him and Mark Hamill as
Hobgoblin.
As Hobgoblin, yeah, and Ed Asner, and they had some stars. It's not as star-studded a cast as Batman, but it's close. It's close.
So I'm not going to be making fun of this the entire time, just so our audience is not worried. There is stuff in this that's funny unintentionally, but I want to get a few things out of the way. Number one, the theme song is terrible.
Yeah.
I always thought that, and watching it now, I'm like, okay, the musician had 2 weeks to write it, and he woke up late on the last day, like, oh shit. Okay. Spider-Man, I'll say that a bunch, and then Spider Blood, and then I'll just noodle on a guitar, and there you go, and turn it in, and it's a song. And boy, even in 1995, I'm like, this is awful.
You know that's Joe Perry, right?
Really?
Well, he is playing it, but he didn't write the song. But yes,
Yeah, he's
Joe
the-
Perry of Aerosmith.
He's the guy. Who yeah.
And the first time I made this joke on our show too, but like when you listen to that Spider Blood, I can't not hear Spider Blog.
Spider Blog.
And it makes it such a different thing than just going Spider Blog.
That was the early
Spider Blog,
2000
Spider
series.
Blog,
Well,
Spider
and
Blog.
they're very
Webs in the city. Like,
when they're very proud of their CGI cityscapes in that intro too.
Yeah.
Like they shouldn't be.
well, that was
I mean-
originally the idea for this was to always have that be whenever he was through the city, have it be through a CGI city.
Yeah, we'll just replay the same old city
And-
shit.
Well, they couldn't afford it. They didn't do it. And I love it when you hear development stories like that and people accidentally make a good decision. Like they were going to make something that was going to age like milk and then they just couldn't because of money. And, it doesn't look great when he goes through cities now, but it looks a lot better than it would have.
But there's still about 5 seconds of CG per episode they'll cobble together.
Yeah, like
But-
when a car is driving, it'll be the
but,
CG backdrop.
Well, that music is the same thing that also always happens with Chaim Saban Productions, which is his good buddy / business partner, Shuki Levy. He is the credited composer on all those things. And I'm
Sure he
not
wrote it
saying
all.
he didn't write them all, but, he made a lot of money off those compositions from ASCAP.
The music, I feel like they're trying to do like a Batman fake out where
Yeah.
they want you to think it's all originally music composed for each scene, but it's clearly like in how it's edited, I feel like it's either library music or they just hired a guy to write, I don't know, 10 songs that they can drop in. But there are some awkward cuts between music cuts or
Yes.
music pieces that make me think, oh, this was not organically scored where someone sat down and wrote. I mean,
really
obviously, with
doubt
how
that.
it looks, they were not going to do that.
No, I mean they're not. It's so heavily edited. Well, I think too with that theme song, it's good for the '90s. I like it for its time, but I think too they were just kind of stuck with how do we make something that isn't the famous Spider-Man theme song? Like everybody knows Spider-Man, Spider-Man. They can't do that. They got to go and they just have to like counter program to it because they're not going to pay for that song all the time.
Well, it is also. I think it's also a thing where they're trying to reflect the times a little bit more.
Yeah, it's
so
hardcore
contrasting.
90s.
Contrasting with Batman's really good because that's. I mean, the primary difference between those cartoons is Batman has a very clear vision to it, and it's very
Yeah.
unified. Like everything to the Batman animated series is to a point. This is much more of a commercial product that is made to be a Saturday morning cartoon. What will kids like? And going
Yeah.
kind of backwards, as opposed to have this thing we want to make, and kids will eat it up because it's high quality.
There's no unified artistic vision. It's just
Yeah.
like we have these characters, make them dance around, and kids will love it. Yeah.
Well, another problem the show faced was a ton of like budget snafus and just production errors. Like technically the show premiered November 19th, 1994, but that was when they had one episode ready and they're like, we got to push this 4 more months till we're done with these other episodes. So the rest of the season 1 didn't air until early 1995. And the first episode of Spider-Man is deceptively well animated, and that's because it's the pilot. They didn't know how much cheaper they could do it. And you end up seeing pilot shots in most of the episodes
Wow.
because it actually looks good, and they just reuse it. Like, well, Spidey might have a different background here, but I mean, how many times does Spider-Man look at stuff? Let's just use that again. He looks at something.
So another thing budget-wise I wanted to point out is there were fewer commercials 20 plus years ago on TV, and a cartoon of this caliber on daytime TV would be 22 minutes, often 23. This cartoon, if you cut out the opening and the ending, is 17 minutes long. And let me tell you, the pacing at times is crazy. Like when I was watching this, I'm like, guys, slow down for a second. There's a turn in this. We'll get to it. Where Spider-Man stops being Spider-Man for like 20 seconds.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm
Yes.
done. Okay, now I'll do it again.
Yep.
It's just like, no, this is if he's gonna stop it, there should be some like dramatic wait, but they have to keep going. They can't
At
pause.
least have a scene in between those that
Yeah.
shows time passing, maybe.
But the pacing at times is just like, what, we're here now, and this is how, it's just like, boy, there's no fat.
That's definitely true, but and I don't think this is intentional. This is not me drawing a bullseye around
sure.
where it's shot, but that is how 60s comics feel to me when I read them
Oh,
as
yeah.
well. Like they're just so compact and fast. Like it felt, because the pacing was so quick, I think it undermined some of like an emotional score to it, but it made it much more entertaining than it maybe could have been because it was always moving. At least for me, like it doesn't look good. Like I ended up actually liking this episode of this cartoon more than I thought I would. Like I was entertained. It was
I did
silly.
too,
It was
yeah.
super silly, but also just like kind of fun and funny and moving along at that clip was part of it.
I was just having fun. I mean, I was having fun with just how it had no regard for me, like digesting anything. It's like, no, we're moving on now. We're moving on. But in terms of like a 30-minute show, 4 to 5 minutes is a lot of
of
scenes.
commercials.
Yeah.
No, it's a lot of scenes they
yes,
could. I mean,
yeah.
that too. Sorry. I mean,
yeah.
it's a lot of extra commercials. It's a lot less animation to pay for, but it's also a lot of scenes that could have added to the storytelling or enhanced the storytelling.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about Spider-Man, the animated series specifically, and again, not drawing a bullseye around what they hit, but some of that stuff they would do later. So like Henry and I talked about this before we got Mike, but this show, unlike, even unlike the Batman animated series, like one of the things that was the reason why I liked the Marvel cartoons as a kid, that, opinion's not correct with the fullness of time, but as a kid was that they would do these kind of serialized stories. Like it would be, and so things in this episode that are skipped over, specifically the incident that creates Mysterio, the reason why he wants revenge, is enumerated on later. There's an episode where they talk about that and they kind of go into it. So some of that stuff gets filled in.
Well, and that's also why I picked this episode out of the many in the series, because I wanted a season one and not a multi-parter, because the show became a multi-parter show. Like the writers on this in X-Men didn't have an edge on Batman in quality or budget or voice acting, but they could do linear storytelling
Yes.
that Batman couldn't do. So
There would be subplots.
there would be
Like
subplots, like all this stuff from comics, which that was also in a macro sense of comic books. Marvel
Yes.
in the Silver Age was all about a continuing soap opera that goes from issue 1 all the way forward, while meanwhile DC envisioned their comic books, at least in the 60s, as this Superman adventure could be the only one you ever read, and you don't need to know anything else about it, and it just happens.
That's actually surprising to know. I mean, I think I vaguely knew about this, but especially at that time, that was forbidden to have serialized storytelling because they wanted to, after the fact, chop it up however they wanted and sell it to whoever they wanted to sell it to. So occasionally you get the pilot would be a 2-parter, or like with Gargoyles, a 5-parter, where it would be an event, but everything after that would be just an episodic adventure.
Saban, compared to a lot of its contemporaries, their shows got a lot more linear. Like Power Rangers started kind of episodic, but it got even linear as it went. Same with X-Men, like X-Men before it, and that is another advantage that this show had too. That like even more than Batman, I would say, though Batman totally took a comic off the shelf and then adapted it, but Spider-Man and X-Men did it way more. Like this one is even in name a classic issue of Spider-Man. The Alien, the Venom arc is. I could tell you each issue that they're pulling from there.
Yeah.
They're all, and
Cool.
same with X-Men. They're like, well, Days of Future Past is a great story. Let's do that. And Phoenix Saga is a great story. Let's do that.
What's really neat, though, and the cool thing about that is that when you watch an episode later, there can just be, they can let some of that memory do some lifting for you. So somebody shows up, you're watching the X-Men animated series, and you watch the first arc with Mr. Sinister, and he gets obliterated at the end. They scatter him on a beach, actually. Weirdly enough, it's a long story.
He has a lot of green goo in him.
He just he's like a T2. He's a T2000. But the when he comes back, you as a kid, it's like, oh shit, Mr. Sinister's back. The Spider-Man cartoon does that as well, and I think that's valuable. Like it's not as an adult like dallying in it, or just like if you watch one cartoon, it's not good to have that. And it's why like picking an episode for this is difficult. You talked about and just kind of like jumping in, you want to have a complete story. But that did so much heavy lifting and actual drama in a way that kind of mirrors, we were talking about how the Marvel shows had like really good voice acting. They would do these, and sound design too. Not so much this show, but the X-Men animated series has excellent sound design. Like the sound effects for everything are really good. And they would just kind of do these corners, like put in care and attention to detail where they could to kind of elevate it above its weight class.
It really helped the show that it was being run by John Semper Jr., that was the showrunner of the show, who is also an African-American man, which I only note because there has never been a regular writer of Amazing Spider-Man comics who wasn't a white guy.
Oh,
While
damn.
meanwhile, in 1994, an African-American man is running the Spider-Man series. And he is a true fan of the comics. That's how he came to it differently than the guys who were doing Saturday morning stuff, because he just knew like, well, this was a good comic. I'll just take that. We got the story here. And not only that, but he often hired writers who had written those stories or had written Spider-Man stories for the comic books. Like Marv Wolfman is credited on this episode. He wrote for Amazing Spider-Man for about 3 years in the 70s, while he's most famously the writer of the classic Teen Titans series with George Perez and also Crisis on Infinite Earths. There's also Len Wein, J.M. DeMatteis.
I was just gonna bring up J.M. DeMatteis. Yeah.
He was my Amazing Spider-Man writer, or one of them, him and David McElhaney, but I'm geeking out too much. Anyway, the point is that he would hire the writers too, like who knew Spider-Man, but also could write it within a 30-minute block or 17 minutes.
17 minutes in and out. Hurry up, Spider-Man.
And the last thing, I listened to a couple Semper interviews before this, and one of the funniest things he brings up is that it is very true the show had some problems with censors, where most famously, they have to have laser guns. Every character has laser guns, not regular guns, which Batman's way around that was Tommy guns, and just like guns your dad doesn't own.
Batman did have a lot of handguns, though.
Yes. Yeah, that's
they
true.
somehow, maybe it's a Spielberg connection, maybe it's the Prestige connection, but they still got away with a lot of the things that seemed to be forbidden at the time. Having recently watched.
Yeah, that's true. But and so Semper, and he had all these other rules too. That like one time he said he got a censor note saying, when Spider-Man lands on this roof, make sure he doesn't land on any pigeons. Like, don't.
What if he did?
Yeah,
What
what
if he
if-
just squashed a pigeon and then just
God, no.
Just put that on the
scrape the
board.
bones off his feet? And then
Oh, he's like, whoops, Spider-Sense didn't warn me of that.
Do those people know how animation works? Someone would have to storyboard
Yeah,
that
it's
and
not
write
real.
it down. Yeah, it's just like
well, in New York buildings, there are pigeons everywhere, so Spider-Man would have to worry about that. You're going to include that, right?
clear the pigeons from your drawing before you put
Shoo.
Spider-Man on it.
Shoo, somebody comes in and says shoo to the storyboard, and then
They blow on the background.
Well, and Spider-Man had all the other rules of like, no, he can't punch anybody unless they're a robot. And
No
just all
broken
that
glass
stuff.
either.
No broken glass,
Yeah.
none of that stuff. And so, but like Semper had told those stories, but he's also said like they were no more censored than Batman or Power Rangers was in 1995 either. It was just Batman in the first season, like we talked about in Heart of Ice. They got away with a lot of stuff in that episode that they would create rules to not have
That's
in
right.
later episodes. And Power Rangers made it even worse. Them and the Ninja Turtles, like, it's why I love those shows as a kid, because I was like, hey, these are kung fu guys punching each other. I can't see He-Man do that. And then they had to turn that down afterwards.
And have like comedy fights where people get hit with pizzas.
Yes. Fortunately, Spidey already has his comedy. Like, he can just web people. It's like, well, Spider-Man can't punch him. Okay, he's going to web him. Unlike in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, where they have to like they have to just hit Shredder with a pizza every time.
or hit a
Like,
chandelier. Like it's all
Yeah.
indirect combat.
Yeah.
A lot of chandeliers in the Turtles world.
The Shredder is a man of taste, you know.
And yeah, Semper and his crew really did build like an animated Marvel universe in the show, much more than DC did. DC had a lot more rules early with Batman of like they couldn't have any characters outside of the Batman mythos for so long. I think they barely got away with having Etrigan on some Batman episodes, and they got a little looser in Superman, where he got to meet Green Lantern and Flash, which were more like backdoor pilots for those shows. But meanwhile, on Spider-Man, not in the first season, but by the second season, he met the X-Men, he met Daredevil, Captain America, Iron Man, the Fantastic Four, the Hulk.
In those Secret Wars episodes, there's a subplot about Blade and Morbius, the living vampires,
Yes,
teaming
yeah.
up to go fight Doctor Doom, and an unrelated, like go to Latveria.
That's right. And even on a show with only laser guns, they put in the fucking Punisher in 1995, like, which was nuts.
It's an ironic hell for him.
So it only ran for 4 years.
Yes, only for 4 years and 65 whole
Yeah.
episodes.
That's your standard order, but I guess they just split it up over what, like 13 episode seasons, 12 episode seasons?
Yeah.
They're all odd. They're all odd. It's 5 seasons, but they're all odd numbers. It's like 11, 15, 14.
And by the end, they got to the bog standard 65 for syndication. And it ends in an interesting way where, so there's a funny bit in the show. Mary Jane is his love interest throughout the whole show, which makes sense because they were married at the time of the comics. Meanwhile, Gwen Stacy's dead, so they don't even have a Gwen Stacy in the show. In the show, they're like, well, okay, we're going to get them married. And then they had to write Mary Jane out of the show in a very ridiculous fashion. She couldn't die, but instead she fell into a seriously like Dragon Ball Z, another dimension. And would be gone for 2 whole seasons. Spider-Man would marry her water clone in a later episode.
They really glossed over how Uncle Ben died. It's like they were armed.
You can't say he was
and now
dead.
he's gone.
Yep. You can't say
You figure it out.
But so then in the last episode, Spider-Man, he gets to meet Stan Lee. That's their big farewell to Spidey. And also that Madam Web.
Does he fight him?
No,
He webs them. There are standards.
He gets teleported to the real world and meets Stan Lee, and then Stan Lee's like, I never thought I'd meet you, Spider-Man. And
Get back in the book.
I own you. I created you and only me.
And I can destroy you.
And they were also handcuffed by a lot of other things too. Like they have to, in the case here, they actually create a character in this episode to replace one that was dead in the comics. But they're like, well, we got to make up a new person to be the sassy female detective who helps Spider-Man out on cases. So they sometimes, same with like Felicia Hardy, who becomes a Black Cat both in the show and in the comics. She didn't go to high school with Spider-Man in the comics, but they're like, 2 birds with one stone. Felicia Hardy she can be Gwen Stacy, Liz Allen, and Felicia Hardy all in the same body and just compress the characters.
Who played the female cop? Her voice sounded very familiar.
It is Dawn Wynn, who
Oh.
was on Different Strokes,
Different
among other
Strokes,
things.
okay.
It also has been acting and done it. She's done a lot of voice.
A lot of voice acting. Yeah, I've heard her a bunch.
And so the show ended with a bang and was immediately followed by 13 episodes of the show Spider-Man Unlimited, which is horrendous, such a bad show. If you're a furry, you'll be into that show. Like, I'm not saying that mockingly. Like, it is. There's a lot of it's a very furry show. Spider-Man goes to a planet of all animal hybrid people.
And that's the premise for the entire series?
Yes, the show
Wow.
starts with Spider-Man getting... It's actually very similar to Josie and the Pussycats in space. Like, Spider-Man accidentally gets on a rocket ship and flies to another alternate Earth and has adventures there.
I'd like the real story to be he hit his head at Anthrocon and he was hallucinating all of it. A planet of furries.
But that also came at the time where... so the show also was in a weird time where Marvel was going through bankruptcy, so they kind of got to do some stuff like that Secret Wars thing. I bet if Marvel wasn't in complete disarray from their bankruptcy, they wouldn't have approved all of those guest stars in the same cartoon.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is the show. It was followed up by many more Spider-Man cartoons afterwards. Like, I think there's been 6 at this point. They're currently doing there's a brand new one that's going on Disney right now on Disney XD, simply Marvel's Spider-Man.
That's the one with, is that the one I've seen the trailers for where Donald Glover is the voice?
No, that was actually an Ultimate
that's a movie?
Spider-Man. Yes, that I cannot wait for.
Yeah,
the Edge of Spider-Man
that
movie.
looks
Edge of
badass.
Spider-Verse. Yeah. Into the Spider-Verse. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. It's where all of the multiple universe Spider-Men team up.
Is that a CGI movie?
It is, yeah.
Okay, the trailer looked cool.
It did really look cool. Like,
The one thing about that trailer that drives me nuts is him eating food, and it looks like he just dunked the entire thing in a bucket of water first. Like everything is too wet.
Yeah.
Like he's got soft teeth and he needs to.
But I'm glad finally there's a Spider-Man movie where Peter Parker is in his mid-30s and kind of doesn't have his shit together. It's finally Spider-Man is me again. I grew up projecting myself on Spider-Man, and now he's grown up to be me.
He's projecting himself onto you.
Yeah. I mean, I'd kill to have his abs.
Coming later today to Fox. The television event you've been waiting for with the amazing superhero who's worth waiting for, Spider-Man. It's the special sneak preview you can't miss. Watch the all-new Spider-Man coming later today to Fox Kids.
It'll transform you.
Walloping web snappers. It's the break, Bob.
Hey, it's Bob Spider-Blood Mackey.
It's Henry
Spider-Blood,
here.
Spider-Blood.
Boy, I hope you guys are enjoying this one. I loved talking about Spider-Man lore and teaching people like Bob what they need to know about Spider-Man.
The school system failed me.
And I hope you guys are enjoying this one too. And a special thanks to Gary Butterfield for showing up and being our co-pilot in Spider-Man here.
Yeah, you guys are both comic book nerds.
Yes, yeah.
I'm
yeah.
a manga nerd.
You'll hear all about manga and anime in some of our other episodes of What a Cartoon if you're not a subscriber.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to hear next week's episode ahead of time, which is sort of like a manga.
That's right, you can hear the Darkwing Duck episode, Life, the Negaverse, and everything if you sign up for the Patreon at patreon.com/Talking Simpsons at the $5 level. You get every episode of this podcast a week ahead of time and ad-free, and every episode of Talking Simpsons, our sister podcast, a week ahead of time and ad-free as well. And then also all of the exclusive stuff we have on our Patreon that will never leave. It is locked in I call it the Mackey Vault, if you will.
You've got Talking Futurama and Talking Critic. We go through the entirety of the Critic television series, all 23 episodes, and that includes the webisodes, and Futurama's first season, which was the second of our miniseries, and we'll have another miniseries before you know it, folks. And that's only available to the $5 plus patrons at patreon.com/Talking Simpsons.
Yes, and along with our scheduled things like series and recaps and things like that, we also have surprises all the time. Like, we We talked about our LA trip on an hour-long podcast. We talked about the series One Piece and why you should get into it despite it being 20 years long. And we also just have interviews that come up out of nowhere that we surprise you with. So there's always something there for you on the Patreon. If you've never been on Patreon or if you've never been a subscriber to us, if you sign up now, there will be dozens and dozens and dozens of podcasts with us on it you've never heard before. Like weeks and weeks of podcasts. You can obliterate your entire next few months just listening to us, and I suggest it.
You know, if you've never used Patreon before, maybe it can seem like a strange concept, but seriously, I have been a subscriber on Patreon, a user of it for like 3-4 years now.
Me too.
It's great. It's a great way to directly support the people I enjoy, and I hope that's what you feel about us too. And also, if you're a newer listener, you know, why go back through all the free ones that have ads on them? Why not hear the ad-free versions in the feed you'll get when you sign up?
Yes, the best versions. And again, if you've never been a patron before or on Patreon before, if you sign up, you can actually just use the Patreon app to listen to our stuff. Or if you don't want to do that, you get a code from Patreon, super easy to find, and we'll give it to you. It shows up when you subscribe. You drop that code into whatever you use to listen to podcasts, your podcatcher, iTunes, whatever, and it will download our podcast, our bonus podcast, as it downloads your normal podcast. So you don't have to change your podcasting lifestyle for us.
So please, last time, check it out, patreon.com/Talking Simpsons. You get a real bang for your buck there. Now, my spider sense is telling me, Bob, we have to go back to the rest of the show.
I think my Malibu Stacy's broken.
Okay, so this episode of Spider-Man the Animated Series, The Menace of Mysterio, is lifted directly from Amazing Spider-Man 13 from 1964.
Oh, wow.
Even in title, which was Mysterio's first appearance. And I'll give you a little rundown on the differences in this one. In the comic, Mysterio has no motive in the comic. He's just like, I want to steal stuff, and if I pretend to be Spider-Man, I can do that. And he has no revenge arc, and also Spider-Man tape records his confession, and that's how he catches him. And
that old gag.
And there's a subplot where Spider-Man, on the cover it says, I bet you never read a comic book where a superhero goes to a psychiatrist, and it really is for 5 panels. Spider-Man thinks he has a split personality disorder, and he goes, I'm going to go to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist says, welcome, Spider-Man. I'm going to be so famous analyzing Spider-Man. And then Spider-Man is about to shake his hand and then thinks, wait, I might reveal my secret identity to him. Goodbye. And he jumps out the window. It's like, Stan Lee had that idea, and Ditko was like, here's 4 fucking panels. That's all you get.
It's great. Well, I mean, Mysterio mentions his psychiatrist in this episode. I was like, that's a real Animaniacs joke. I wonder if that was in the original comic or not.
There's a little more postmodernist to it, but this is a funnier Spider-Man. It's something older stuff didn't get. Spider-Man has to always be quipping and be talking to himself and also be like a self-hating loser. Like that's all the Spider-Man keys there. I forgot to mention too, this voice acting cast includes Christopher Daniel Barnes, aka Greg Brady from the Brady Bunch movie.
Oh my God, okay.
But on top of being Spider-Man and Greg Brady, for Disney fans, he's most famous as Prince Eric in The Little Mermaid.
Really? Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay, I had no idea.
Yeah. So but other than playing Greg Brady, he kind of just got into voice acting full time after that. But
where do you go from there? I mean,
you're at the top.
Gregory Brady. Keep adding. Gregoraga.
Gregoraga.
Yeah.
And also Ed Asner, who I think is, other than J.K. Simmons, the best J. Jonah Jameson ever.
Yeah, he's really good in this.
And he was an old man then, and now he's still with us.
Yeah,
crossing fingers.
He's one of those, he outlived Ernest Borgnine.
He did.
He's one of those very so in the Triforce of round old guys. Ed Asner alive, Ernest Borgnine dead, Don Rickles dead. So the Triforce of round old guys, only one remains.
It's a tongue teen. He got all of their power. So
and as we said, Mark Hamill, Hank Azaria, also The future Solid Snake David Hayter voices Captain America.
Holy shit.
Martin Landau played the Scorpion, and Jennifer Hale had one of her first voice acting gigs on this, too.
That's a real Batman power move, getting all of these celebrities.
Yeah, though Martin Landau had to be recast because I think they didn't understand how hard it would be to get him for late. They're like, we can get him for one episode, but if you want to have Macagargan appear in multiple more of them, like, you're going to need a cheaper dude.
He was coasting on that Ed Wood fame. That won him an Oscar, right?
That's true. Yeah, he was. Though sadly, this episode is not driven by a guest star like that because they just got like. No offense to Greg Berger, I think Greg Berger is amazing. He's Grimlock. How could I not love Grimlock and Cornfed?
I'm pretty sure.
Inject.
Cornfed too.
Yep.
Yeah, he's Cornfed,
Okay.
yeah.
I think he actually sits in for Kelsey Grammer when they do a Sideshow Bob episode because he does not come to the table reads. Kelsey Grammer, so Greg Berger sits in for Kelsey.
Oh, he'd be a great man when Kelsey Grammer finally like implodes or something. He can be such a.
I didn't know he was Cornfed. Cornfed is such a great performance, man.
Yes.
We're gonna do another Duckman, I swear. Make my dreams come true, everybody.
And yeah, also ironically, with the timing of this episode aired 31 years after the comic came out, and now it is 23 years after that. So we're almost as far removed from this episode airing as the episode was from when the comic came out.
We are 20 years and 6 months out from the cancellation of the series, or from the final episode. It aired in January of
My God.
98.
Man, that's shocking. The time shouldn't move forward, I say.
And just putting one of those little markers on there as far as marking of time as well. It's kind of timely to do this episode because Mysterio is going to be the villain in the new Spider-Man,
Yeah.
Spider-Man movie by Jake Gyllenhaal.
It's I believe. Yeah, I think they've been kind of catty about that, but I believe that is definitely going to be it. I couldn't believe they waited this long to get Mysterio in a movie because his powers are special effects. That why isn't he a movie villain first? Like, and his fishbowl head. It's just such. I love Mysterio's design. Like it is when I reread his first appearance for this. I was like, man, this is a classic Steve Ditko weirdo design. He's got eyeballs on his body. He has a giant fishbowl head, a big purple cape. Really, he feels like a Doctor Strange villain, not a Spider-Man villain.
Yeah, I mean, based on his appearance, I know nothing about Mysterio until I watched this episode, by the way. Like, based on his appearance, I was expecting him to be like a magic wizard or something. I was not expecting the very
Well, that's the idea,
practical explanation of his powers.
Yeah, and that's one of the cool things about Mysterio. And like he fools people, and it's a little bit hinky that he fools people again and again with that. You know, at some point he'd be like, oh, it actually.
Would you compare him to like a Riddler figure in a way?
Kind of like
Okay.
his a little bit. Like
He's a trickster in Riddler
yeah,
style.
he's a trickster.
Who also can just get beat up in one punch like the Riddler too.
Yeah, which famously happens in the Spider-Man 2 GameCube game,
Yes,
where he's one of the best boss fights in video games. I know this isn't a video game
Really?
podcast,
Okay.
but he's been haranguing you for several levels, and you get to the boss fight, and his health meter fills up, and it fills up 3 times, and he flexes, and you punch him, and then all 3 of them just drain.
I do like
He goes down.
health bar gags.
Yeah,
Those are great.
it's real good.
So we get to the opening of Spider-Man robbing a museum, which people need to rob museums more. That's a cool robbery. Those are crimes we need to see.
I love that just diamonds too.
Yeah,
Like, these are the
he's-
ancient diamonds of Nebuchadnezzar, and like,
And he just like scoops them up loose in his hands,
Yeah.
like I'm stealing this stuff here.
like he's carrying a lot of produce.
Bring a sack.
Yeah,
and
Spider
or
sack.
web them up.
spider
like he-
bag, spider bag, spider
He
bag.
does web them up into a bag later, but not out at first. And he catches these officers just like flies. I want to give a Spider-Man blowing kisses as he leaves. too.
Blow
That's
them
cute.
kisses.
And when I started watching this, that's when it hit me of like, yeah, they repeat a lot of shots and in slow motion. Like, so even though it's 17 minutes, I would bet there's 15 minutes of animation in this. If that, you know what? Original animation, 13 or 14. And they just like stretch and stretch. And
Yeah.
it's also like a digital, it looks digital. It does not look
It is,
as cell
yeah.
paint, which was, it was in its infancy then, meaning it made a lot more mistakes in 94 than
And
now.
the colors are sort of just like too bright on everybody.
Yes.
They didn't have as deep as a color palette.
But they committed to those colors with the toys, so they
Yeah.
had to stick with it, and like no shadowing, like no, it's way more of a colorful show than Batman or even Superman, which was the colorful Warner show. We cut to Peter Parker waking up. This is a Peter Parker who is more experienced. So some shows, adaptations, they start with Peter as a new guy as Spider-Man who is doing it in high school. This is picking up more with the Spider-Man of the 70s and 80s who is trying to balance college life while still living at home with Aunt May and being Spider-Man. So he gets, which actually that's a more interesting choice. They don't have a kid character for Spider-Man to hang out with, and he's actually older than the audience can like really identify with, I think. Yeah. If he was a teenager, you could be like, hey, that's like Zach in Saved by the Bell. I'll grow up to be him in just a couple of years.
In the Batman show animated series, Robin was in college. Did they age him up from normal Robin?
Yeah, they were sticking him at Dick Grayson's age. That was in the comics too. So
Dragon Age fanfic. I can't have you reading it on air.
And but yeah, Peter Parker wakes up and gets a call from Mary Jane.
Hi, it's me, MJ. I'm not calling too early, am I?
Mary Jane? No, I've been up for hours.
Then maybe you can tell me why non-planetary masses don't exert gravitational forces.
Actually, they do exert gravitational force, but it's so minute.
I knew you'd be the one to call. Bet you can answer this one, too. Why do theater majors have to take physics?
Sorry, you'd need Einstein for that.
Maybe I should see if he's busy Friday night.
Actually, Friday?
I've got a physics test next Monday, and I've been so busy rehearsing for the Classics Festival that... Peter, this is where you're supposed to jump in and say, MJ, I'd love to help. Maybe we could see a movie, too?
A movie? Hold on a sec while I check my schedule. Yes! Tight schedule, MJ, but I think I can make it.
Great! See you then. Oh, and Peter, try to wear matching socks this time.
Whoa!
That's Spider-Man breaking his ceiling fan again through his erotic excitement.
I tell you what, a little something for Daddy.
I know.
In that scene, I was shocked by the poses they put her in.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't like offended. I'm like, wow, wow.
We're having fun with Mary Jane's aerobic workout.
What if she bent over like so?
Yeah, she really she does like the hut hike thing, but in a sexy way,
and then gets on her back as well.
Yeah, it's so weird too because I felt like the voice actress like either wasn't told or didn't care what her character was supposed to be doing because she's doing a full workout.
Yeah.
But she sounds like New England aristocracy. Like, well, Peter Parker. Like she sounds it's a very high tone of her voice.
And she's not acting like she's moving either.
No, winded or moving or breathing.
Yeah, though I do like this portrayal of MJ because, and I call her that because she's my best friend and I love it. No, but Mary Jane, they play both sides of her in this show because in the comics when Mary Jane first appeared, she's a lot like this, which she is the party girl. She's like, let's have fun and dance, everybody. Like that was her thing. She was the wild child. In the 80s, when they decided to give her a little more depth, they reveal like that was all a facade because I had a terrible childhood growing up and I just wanted to have fun and forget about it. And so in the show, she also has a terrible childhood. They kind of talk around her having an abusive father. More so, she had a bad childhood because Hydro Man was an ex-boyfriend of hers.
That ruined my high school years. I think to go back to the acting on her, I think probably what happened was it was a phone conversation. And in the storyboard or whatever, they were like, this is boring. Let's have her do something. But the voice track was recorded, and they're not going to bring her back in on this cheap show to grunt more.
Yeah, because Spider-Man does a lot of business.
Yeah.
During that, he's jumping around like a maniac.
Yeah, I could see in storyboard, I bet you're right. In storyboard, they're like, this is just so boring to keep looking at her. Like, so they made it a lot more exciting. But, well, you talk about cheap. That reminds me of another classic cheap Saban story, which was in the mid-'90s when they had the X-Men on in their first appearance. They said the producers of Spider-Man complained it was one of the most expensive episodes they ever did. They recorded in LA, Spider-Man, but X-Men recorded in Canada, and they had to fly in all of the people to Canada to record their parts. And they're like, we had to pay for all these flights for like 6 voice actors in their hotels. It broke us. I was like, they're working at scale.
And you made millions off of this show.
Yeah. And also, I'm thinking like, look, I know this was like pre-internet, but you can't tape them in Canada and just ship the tapes there? Like how it's voice acting. They don't have to be in the same room. And it never made sense to me, but they complained about that in the X-Men Oral History I just read in the last year.
Even at this era, though, actors were recording their lines through like DSL sometimes. I remember
Simpsons did that all the time.
Yeah, even in the 90s, I remember reading Lion King, like Matthew Broderick was rarely there. And that kind of pissed me off. I'm like, go show up at Disney. You're making a fucking movie, dude.
It's an afternoon to record this anyways.
Yeah.
Show up. Like, yeah, though, how does Peter Parker explain that fan to Aunt May?
Yeah, well, by all accounts, if you didn't know this show, you'd think he was the breadwinner anyway. It goes into him being like looking at a 45-year-old man. So
he's a 45-year-old man living with his 80-year-old mom.
Yeah, like she's an emotional and financial drain.
It's a weird disconnect seeing that old-looking character model that he has in the teenage-style room.
Yes.
You know, it's just a weird disconnect. I realized they had to draw him that way, but it's sort of like visually odd.
And he's being such a teenager too. This whole like, you know, we're gonna go to the malt shop on Friday, like a date on Friday. Woohoo! You know,
It's funny to think of like a guy in his second year in college being like a date,
like a girl.
Woohoo!
I do like that it's a more nerdy Peter Parker because Spider-Man is a science geek, like which they really leaned into in Homecoming and in recent comics, but they always distance themselves from it in other adaptations, I think, because they want Peter to be an everyman, not a nerd who knows what gravitational bodies do.
Yeah. And again, the voice acting is great. If you go back to that Retronauts we talked about, Spider-Man is like, oh, the Green Goblin was here. I'll fight him. He's like, it's a very like, it's sort of
it's
like
what MJ does the impression of.
Yeah, exactly.
Like when she's, you know, she had just played that game.
But seemingly everything's coming up Spider-Man, or is it?
Peter, look, this is terrible. Spider-Man robbed the Metropolitan Museum last night. Took dozens of valuable artifacts. Manhandled the guards.
That's impossible. Anyone could put on a Spider-Man costume and break into the museum.
But who else could do that?
Well,
Or that? Oh, and the sheer lack of respect.
well, that I'll cop to. But I'm not a thief. Off to work, Aunt May.
Yes, dear, yes. Have a nice day, Peter. Never could understand why so many people thought Spider-Man was a hero.
Boy, she's like Mary Worth, isn't she?
Yes.
How I hate her.
I love that old style Aunt May of just like, oh, that awful Spider-Man. He should leave those people alone.
He's disrespectful.
I really enjoy how they're watching a clip show of the first 2 minutes of the episode, and also it's framed as security footage. They put like a TV frame around the clip, so it's like, were the security cameras shooting coverage too? You know, just like, where were these security cameras?
It's quite ridiculous.
I know why they did it. I know why they did it. We're having fun.
Also, Aunt May hands him a plate of what looks like pancakes, but I'm going to insist they are wheat cakes because
Johnny cakes.
Well, no, wheat cakes are Peter's favorite food, as established in Amazing Fantasy 15.
Nice.
And if you get a copy of Untold Tales of Spider-Man Annual #1, you'll find the recipe for wheat cakes.
Let me guess, wheat.
Yeah, it's just wheat. I mean, it's just pancakes, but with more wheat in it. That's it. And,
I love wheat. Hey,
but
kids.
I don't know. It feels fun to see an old school Aunt May here, and I do mean old because I'm used to they keep making her more hip and young. I mean, she's a 50-year-old woman in Spider-Man Homecoming.
In Homecoming, she's hot. Like right, like she's played to be hot as hell.
Everybody's in love with her.
I dislike how that was the one. I'm not saying you did this, Gary, but that was the one thing people took away. Like, wow, a 50-year-old woman was hot.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah.
What?
No, but they. I mean, it's not just like that. They frame it as such. Like they're explicitly sexualizing her and making it as such. And it's not so much like, oh, it's weird because she's old. It's weird because it's Aunt May. And every other portrayal before has just been like a grandma.
You know what? I guess I don't have that baggage going in, so I wasn't as put off by that. Or like, I don't know, not put off is the wrong word.
I'm not saying old people have to retire from sex.
But she is.
They should.
Just from the roads, am I right?
Yeah.
She is written as in her 80s.
Get off the roads.
She's written in her 80s in the first Spider-Man comics, and the whole Lee and Ditko run. She almost dies at least 3 times. Like she's teetering on the edge of death, and they've kind of had to fix that as years have gone on, and also just the idea, like
they kept having having those backup strips where Spider-Man webs up the specter of old age
Yes.
and leaves him for police to catch.
Well, I think too it was a more acceptable idea 50 years ago to have like a spinster old aunt. Like, well, though Aunt May's not a spinster, she's a widow who just lost her husband.
And she's not allowed to marry by society.
Certainly not. It took her 50 years to get to remarry, and she remarried J. Jonah Jameson's dad.
Oh my God! How old was he?
Well, they also kind of aged down Jonah
Okay.
a little too.
Did she married proposed? Was it engaged to Dr. Octopus?
She almost married Dr.
Almost
Octopus,
married Dr.
yes,
Octopus.
in the early hundreds.
Because she likes a man who cuts his own hair.
With this ring, the cover says, "With this ring, I the web."
Yeah.
And then it was recalled. It was a typo. It's wed. It's wed. Everybody.
No, it's quite ridiculous. Somehow she thinks that his arms are like, oh, he has a condition. Like
That's so good.
Yeah,
That's so funny.
So
And she's still into it. Like,
Yeah.
he has a condition that's all these like prehensile 10-foot long arms on his back, and she's down.
well, and it's funny. They write Doc Ock too, where Doc Ock is like, I will murder anyone to finish my plans. Oh, this wonderful old woman. She's such a sweet young lady.
What those arms can do.
I really like that Spider-Man swing animation, but they use it every fucking episode. They did one good web swing, and they're like, okay, did we reverse it last week? Let's not reverse it this week and use it in this shot. Or did we reverse it 10 minutes ago? Okay, then let's use it straight on. Right? But so Peter Parker arrives at his job, which if you don't know, which they don't even say out loud. It's that he's a freelance photographer who works for the Daily Bugle while also being a college student. And I really like his Peter Parker standard outfit that is like polo shirt with jeans. It's what he always wears. But
I don't really understand J. Jonah Jameson in this cartoon, so it feels like, number one, I understand he's his boss. He wants pictures of Spider-Man because, they would sell newspapers, but also he seems to hate Spider-Man like Harvey Bullock hates Batman. Like, I fucking hate you.
Yeah.
What's the story? Like, why does he hate Spider-Man?
Oh, boy.
No.
You've opened a
30 seconds.
He hates Spider-Man because he doesn't believe anybody is a real hero. Everybody has to be out for themselves, and so Spider-Man must secretly be out for it too, because that's just the same way J. Jonah Jameson thinks, that he's always out for himself.
He's an objectivist.
Yes, because
I
Steve
thought so.
Ditko is a hardcore Ayn Rand fan, or was. I actually was rereading, because at the time of this recording, Steve Ditko has passed away in the last 2 weeks. So I was rereading some of his older stuff, and there's a hilarious scene where it's on the college campus where there are protesters who, they have to be vague, but if you're reading it in 1967, you know it's for Vietnam. And so or civil rights. And the protesters on campus, Peter Parker basically says to them, I wish I had time to do that. So why don't you find something to really care about? Get out of here.
Get a job. One of the things that
Spider-Man's hate of the media also, or the distaste for the media, I think is really Randian as well.
One of the things that made me laugh the most in this show, and I think they do play for comedy, it's like how quickly Jameson just falls in love with Mysterio. Just like he digs Mysterio.
Well, he's got such a villain voice too, Mysterio.
Yeah.
I'm the hero here. It's like, all right.
He doesn't laugh. He just blahs. If there's a blah every time you laugh, you're not a good guy.
Well, I
signifier.
I love that Jonah, he is a workhorse, man. He is the publisher of a newspaper, the Daily Bugle, where he does his own writing. You see him writing an editorial in this episode, but he also is not just the producer, but the host of news segments.
He is like the chief Wiggum of that place. He has to be everywhere.
The wiki I'm using just to remind me of the plot mentions that he's stationed at the museum when he shows up. He's just already there. Like, there's crimes about.
Yes. So
I'm waiting for news.
Here's Jonah.
You're on in 15 seconds, Mr. Jameson.
Parker, get over here, now.
Be right there, Mr. Jameson. Kind of surprised to see you handling this one yourself.
I cover Spider-Man whenever, wherever, unlike you. Why weren't there any pictures on my desk this morning?
I'm sorry, but...
I can't sell sorry. You call yourself a newsman?
You're on, JJ.
Hi there, J. Jonah Jameson. Here live with a special broadcast of Spider-Man, the final humiliation.
I'd love to stick around for the rest of your babble, but...
He's so full of hate.
I love that his tone of voice doesn't change at all. Hey, it's me. Spider-Man. I'm mad at the audience and I'm mad at you.
I have one emotion. You're looking at it.
I can't sell sorry. I love that Jonah. He's always at 100%. Just like, I think it informed a lot of J.K. Simmons's acting, honestly.
Yeah.
J.K. Simmons makes Jonah his own in the Sam Raimi Spider films, but that's the same way Jonah is in all those movies too. Just like, I'm always at 100%. That's Spider-Man. But he's so happy though. It's like, I'm here at the museum for Spider-Man, the final humiliation.
Final Humiliation's very funny as a name, like to me.
It's lovely.
I would go on that ride at Universal Studios.
And so then Spider-Man or Peter, this is something too I really like on the show, that they always got the tension between being Peter Parker and Spider-Man, that he's like, well, I do need to investigate, but I got to do this in Peter Parker clothes. And oh no, I'm caught. Like, what am I going to do? And his finding of the webbing, I also have to say, it is continuity correct that Spider-Man's webbing dissolves in 1 hour. That has always been the rule within the Spider-Man universe. So that's why you don't see webs hanging everywhere in New York City from his web swinging. It always dissolves in an hour.
That makes sense.
I love that scene in this too, where he finds it and he brings it up to the detective, and the detective says something very correct. Like, it feels like it's going to be a very contrived kind of cartoon thing. Like, I found the clue that
in Super Friends, that would have just been the end.
That would have been the end of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we've proven it wrong. But the detective's like, well, maybe he changed his formula. Like, we don't actually know what this is. It's science slime that isn't like, I can't go down to Lowe's and buy some webbing. It's a bespoke thing.
Sorry, I said her name wrong earlier. It is Dawn Lewis who plays Detective Terry Lee, who we'll hear right here.
Oh, she plays La Barbara on Futurama.
Oh, okay. No wonder that sounded so familiar.
And it wasn't
to
Different
me.
Strokes. It was a different world.
Dawn Lewis in a different world. I'm
Yes.
so sorry.
You think all black sitcoms look alike, Henry? That's racist.
I'll play this clip now.
Talk to me.
Well, Spider-Man's webbing always dissolves after an hour. This junk's been here since last
Well,
night.
boy wonder, maybe he's just using different chemicals now. Come on, we better continue this downtown.
Don't be afraid. I'm here to help. I am Mysterio, and I am putting Spider-Man on notice. There's no place you'll be able to hide, and nowhere you can run.
As far as I'm concerned, you're just another creep in a costume. What can you do?
I was hoping you'd ask.
How do you do that? Cheap parlor trick.
I guarantee you I'll catch Spider-Man, but I want all you big shot media people there to record it.
He stuns the crowd with orb tricks.
Yeah, it's
Fushigi. He does a bunch of head Fushigi.
He does like Harlem Globetrotters stuff too.
I actually love it. I laughed out loud. Like, I'm staying with a buddy while I'm here and watched this again last night, and I just cracked up and him rolling his head off his shoulder.
It turns into a basketball.
Which Jonah Jameson holds, so it's not a hologram, but it can move on its own. They explain some stuff later as like,
he does it through a series of cubes.
But yes,
he has a bunch of Amazon dots, and through the power of Amazon dots, that's not a sponsor for the show, but it like that's how he does most of the stuff. And one of the things I love about this, like, they had to give him that revenge plot, but it comes in kind of surprisingly late. Because I kept thinking, if this guy's robbing diamonds, he has, again, technology that no one has. Like, this guy could easily just be a one-man industrial light and magic,
Exactly.
Or just sell, rob the diamonds once and then be rich and then not do crimes.
And then stop doing crimes, which never happens.
No.
There's an implied, off-screen, serious drug habit for most supervillains, I feel like, or something like that, or real estate habit.
Though
or,
I like
Fabergé
that
egg habit.
I do like that in this Mysterio, less so in the comic in his original appearance, but he is such a showman. He's like, oh, look at me, I'm a stuntman. Like, he's, I like that as him as well. And you're right, Jonah just immediately, and though I think if Mysterio really wanted them to accept him as a hero, maybe he shouldn't make them think he destroyed the museum. Like, why do that? Just to show off?
I think it's all part of just one of the things I like about this cartoon is that everyone's at 110%. Like, we're talking about J. Jonah Jameson, but even the police officer was like, all right, boy wonder. Like, it's like, whoa, we just met.
Down. Yeah.
Everyone is way too hostile.
I'm arresting you right now.
Excuse me?
The one thing about the animation here that didn't convey to me the right information was so Mysterio makes a tornado appear that looks like the museum is falling down. It's destroying things. And then they all look up and everything's fine. I was like, did they forget to draw the hole in the ceiling? It wasn't conveyed very well, like what exactly happened.
It just looks like a mistake if you're used to the animation level this works at.
In the next scene, it's clear what happened. But with this, I was like, I guess the thing didn't happen. Okay.
Dr. Terry Lee was a creation for the show. She had not appeared in the comics beforehand. She has since made a random appearance in a canonical Spider-Man story, but she really was created to take the place of a character in the 80s. Spider-Man had this possible love interest, but detective on the police force named Jean DeWolf, this lovely young lady who smoked a fancy cigarette on one of those like Cruella de Vil sticks. But she got killed off in the late 80s. So they were like, well, we can't put it. They had real weird rules of like, if they've been dead too long, they can't be in the Spider-Man show.
I assume that character was white.
Yeah, she's also white.
Okay, well, it's
yeah.
cool that they have a black character in a very white comic, given when it was created.
Finally, some forced diversity up in here. No, but it is true. Spider-Man, it had more African-American characters in it than, say, a 60s Batman or Superman comic would. Like, one of his first supporting characters was Robbie Robertson, but only after Steve Ditko take over. And I don't want to say Steve Ditko didn't want to draw black guys, but I don't think he really ever did. But
white guys are easier to draw.
Yeah. The fickle New York City has already turned on Spider-Man.
It's like Springfield.
He rode a goat overnight. And I'm not even a politician. And this Mysterio guy, where did he come from? And how does he...
We're getting reports of another incident involving Spider-Man. This one at the Brooklyn Bridge Mall. According to police...
Time to go meet my evil twin.
When I heard the mall, I had an idea where he just was appearing as Spider-Man and signing autographs. He's like, $15.
What do you want for Spider-Miss?
Robbing a mall seems like you don't go from museum to mall.
It's kind of like the food, like eating at a mall, though, like at a food court, where you just kind of take one of everything you want from a shop.
And he just has like a bag of jewels from this mall as well. I guess there's like a diamond store in a mall, but a mall you don't see too much in comic book robberies. Museums much more so, but Spider-Man's a more pedestrian guy. That's kind of his thing. And then he fights more holograms. It's like these holograms are magic. But I guess in '94 we thought like, well, soon we'll have holograms that will look like real life. We'll have the holodeck now.
I was just about to bring up the holodeck. Like, this feels semi-inspired by that for sure.
Yeah. And now I don't know what they would do. I think the interesting thing with Mysterio, I think they still kind of do hologram stuff with Mysterio, but the interesting thing with him that it worked even better in the 90s, though they didn't use it here, of him just complaining like, I was a practical effects guy who I lost my job thanks to digital effects. They didn't do that in this episode.
Yeah, everything is a proprietary holocube that he uses. There's no like smoke and mirrors or whatever. It is all just holocubes.
And also, classic supervillain fashion, Mysterio is way too giving with clues about who he is. He's like, it's going to be where it all started. Like, and he also, in the comics, he throws out more movie references. Yellow Brick Road's kind of the only one he can do, which is because The Wizard of Oz is open, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, public domain.
Public domain.
Yeah,
yes,
I think Spider-Man does mention Roger Corman and a few other directors, but they have to be very vague, I think.
He makes a reference to Wile E. Coyote
as
well, which is
not
not a movie.
coyote.
Yeah, certain
that we don't own the rights to.
I like how everybody laughs at Spider-Man too. It's like, oh, Mysterio made him look like a dummy.
Yeah, they're so immediately on his side even before the news breaks.
Yeah,
like, oh, this guy really ran to a wall.
It is like Springfield. They turn on a dime. They're hostile immediately. It's like, I was saving you guys for years.
They only got redeemed in Spider-Man 2, where he becomes a literal messiah.
Well, so Spider-Man goes to meet him on the Brooklyn Bridge, and I gotta say, Spider-Man does look like a dope getting beat by those floating balls. It's because they can't punch each other, so instead he has to go like, whoa, floating balls.
Don't even know what those floating balls were doing. They weren't fireballs. Were they just like scary balls?
Well, I guess they're just a distraction. Well, I do like, it's something they also had trouble incorporating into the cartoons for a while and really understanding, but this gets what his spider sense is, that it warns him of direct danger, but it's not psychic. It's just like, like hot or cold, like, oh, getting warmer. Like, that's his spider sense turning up, and he should know when it's usually how he beats Mysterio, which is just like, well, I know this isn't a trick because of my spider sense.
It's binary, and it's also not like sense. It's not sense-ish. It doesn't rely on the senses.
Yes,
the same way, and like that's a weird thing that they have to, even in Spider-Man and comics, but also when Mysterio showing up other places, they have to kind of round out of that.
Yeah,
like that's the instigating thing, and it kind of made a comeback. But like the Old Man Logan comic, Mysterio is the one who tricks Wolverine into killing his family, and it's like if there's one guy who can get past that, like he can smell what's an illusion and what or he can smell you
that really pissed me off because it felt like Mark Miller thought that was a cool twist, and some editor should have told him like Wolverine has super senses.
If there's one, if there's one guy who could do it, but it kind of feels similar with Mysterio with Spider-Man with the Spidey sense because a lot of times they eventually it comes down to that, but he kind of has to relearn it.
Well, they usually have to put in like a one line like, "Why is my spider sense not working right today?"
Yeah.
Or Mysterio just says, "I knew my new tricks that could fool even your senses, Wolverine."
Yeah. So when he's knocked off the bridge and then a rock hits him, the animation failed me here too. It happens twice in this episode where there's the flash of an image.
So that's his spider sense.
Okay, but what is that image of?
I don't know. I never freeze framed it. It's just like random background.
I was confused, really confused by what that image was and what it signified. Like, was it a previous scene in another episode, or were they foreshadowing something? So that is spider sense happening.
It's just supposed to be. It's supposed to affect the feeling of a spider sense.
And
going
usually
off.
it's just like in the comic, it's stink lines, right?
Yes, yeah. And I love those stink lines. But here's
you got the stink lines and everything.
But here's how the spider sense sounds.
I always did like a good cliffhanger.
The old museum trick. Not falling for.
The old museum trick.
Yeah, I like that as a good like Spider-Man assumes it's fake and then gets hit, but it's too late. I like that too.
And I kind of like that. And then everyone thinks he's drowned, and the entire city's ready to move on from their Spider-Man era.
Yeah, well, he's dead.
He didn't drown because he made like a spider sack.
We mentioned
sack.
before.
Yeah,
Spider sack filled it full of air right before he hit the water. Even though we see him hit the water, it's like, well, when did you make this?
That's the real the car went off the Cockadoodie cliff moment.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. But though in Amazing Spider-Man 13, this exact thing happens of Mysterio knocking him off a bridge and people assuming he's dead. And I do really love how quick to celebration J. Jonah Jameson is that Spider-Man is dead here.
Spider-Man's fish food now. And the city has a new hero. Mysterio. A real hero.
Gasp.
A man who...
What?
Peter? Just wanted to make sure you're still alive.
Mary Jane. Oh, no, our date. I forgot.
You sure know how to make a girl feel important.
Look, if it isn't too late.
Sorry. In my league, it's one strike and you're out.
But, oh, that does it. My life's been a mess since the day I put you on.
This is where it covers so much ground in like a minute. It's like, number one, Jameson's like, he's a corpse. I love you, Mysterio. And then it's like, for what I see as a flimsy reason, he's just like, fuck Spider-Man. I hate being Spider-Man now. I hate it.
Well, it did stop it from getting laid.
He's a handsome man.
Spider-Man. Well, Peter Parker has confidence issues.
Yeah,
so
But it was such a like a thin premise for him to give up being Spider-Man for seemingly forever,
and just the fact that it comes back, like to your earlier point, the fact that it gets reversed instantly is what makes this kind of transcendent.
In about 20 seconds, he like goes down the stairs, has a conversation.
He reminds himself why he should do it.
Yeah,
he reminds his origin story, which like I gotta say, I gotta give the cartoon credit for like putting that in episode 6.
Yeah,
I really like that, But then he immediately is like, oh yeah, I am a good guy. Like,
yes, well, so
you make a lot of sense, me.
Yeah. I would say in Spider-Man history, there are 8,000 stories where he decides he can't be Spider-Man anymore. He's like, it sucks to be. That was the entire plot of Spider-Man 2, the Sam Raimi one. Like, it's a fact of the matter is, it sucks to be Spider-Man, and you have to sacrifice a lot, and you're constantly missing dates. So I like that they put all that in there. Especially when you hear that phone ring, you're kind of like, his dates. Like, it's you remember too.
Well, because you had forgotten too, because you've just done a bunch of business with Mysterio. Yeah. And you're laughing at the image of J. Jonah Jameson like front rubbing to his body being dragged out of the river, Just like,
and Peter really wanted to see Biodome that night.
So he didn't get to be with MJ.
Hey,
and he
Tiger, you want to see that movie about the dome?
Which one?
and yeah, you're right. It moves so fast. He's like, well, now I'm not Spider-Man anymore. New thing. Doorbell. I got the door.
Not even a scene of contemplation. They have with 4 extra minutes, they could have had like a scene where he's like, boy, Yeah.
They needed to have shadowed the first scene. So he does his flashback, and then there needed to be something that happened that he missed. Like Mysterio is like going to do something, and he sees something that's like, oh, this guy needs to be stopped.
Mysterio's still doing evil things. I gotta stop this
I don't
guy.
trust this guy, and see the consequences of it. And that would have been a good parallel, and you easily could have done that in 4 minutes and had it be.
And the what we see of his origins, is that a clip from previous episodes?
No.
Really?
Well, so
Okay.
it's Terry Lee arrives and she tells him like, hey, come on, tell your buddy Spider-Man. He's like, not my problem. I'm not dealing with this. And then she gives him a speech he's heard 8 million times of just like, Spider-Man, I wish you were like Spider-Man. He's not a coward. Like, and so this is when he flashes back. And there was a reason in the pilot episode, they did not have an origin for Spider-Man because at the time of making the pilot, they thought, well, James Cameron's movie is going to come out. Everybody knows Spider-Man's origin. But by this time in production, they're like, oh shit, there is no origin. The movie's not out. We got to put it in here. And so, though it is also very fitting for Spider-Man, there are dozens, if not hundreds of comics where Spider-Man is like, I doubt myself. Wait, I remember my origin. And then he changes his mind.
It's just so funny how you are fired through this series of scenes.
Emotional pinball.
Yeah. And
but mostly by ringing. Like a phone rings and he goes one way, and then the doorbell rings, he goes another way. Like
you're just a battle. Yeah, like so. Like Uncle Ben is dead, right? That's I mean, it's just a very important death that's hanging over everybody. It's what made him a hero, and you're just like you're sped through it. So nothing. There's no time for any of it to stick to you. He just needs to get to his inspiration again.
Yeah. Well, let's hear part one of this origin.
All those times you were taking pictures of him, Parker? Huh. Too bad none of his character rubbed off.
She's right. Spidey never did turn his back when he was needed. Except once. Right after I got my powers, I figured I could earn some quick bucks wrestling. I made the costume so nobody'd recognize me.
Hey! Help! Grab him! Don't let him get away!
Hey, sorry, pal. I'm a wrestler, not a cop. I figured, why should I get involved?
So the wrestling origin story is the comic story.
Yeah, this is actually very true to the comics, including things that don't matter. Like Spider-Man, I guess he needs to be famous to not stop that guy. I will say they kind of conjoin things really quickly. He is a pro wrestler, but then he also becomes just a TV act who like does the Jack Benny show and just like, look at this, the Spider-Man. But it is at his wrestling show that he doesn't stop that crook, and he's just like, not my problem, buddy. And so I do think it's very silly that there's no reason to bring up wrestling, and it actually just kind of complicates an already complicated minute of the show.
Eats up valuable time that they need to tell the story they're telling.
Maybe that, I'm wondering if they did animate some of that for a previous episode and then just dropped it into this. So yeah, they can't say kill and they can't say death, but Uncle Ben died. Like they have to talk around that, and he's, but who killed him?
The cop told me the one who did it had been chased to a warehouse, and whoever it was, I wanted him first. And I got him too. It was the crook from the arena. The one I should have stopped, but I didn't. I had the power and I didn't use it. I lost my uncle because I ignored my responsibilities. He always used to tell me, with great power comes great responsibility. If I stop being Spider-Man, who else will suffer?
Like watching that makes me wish I had an origin story I could reflect on and feel whenever I feel self-doubt.
This is the day it all changed. Only this one day of my life. Well, the Spider-Man, his origin story is also, if he never appeared in another comic, it's just one of like the best one-issue pulp stories ever. It's told in 12 pages. In 12 pages, he gets his powers, he gets famous, and then he loses his uncle and learns his lesson.
That guy was busy that night.
Yeah.
Robbing a wrestling arena and murdering an old man.
Yes. Well, his continuity would later say that he had heard that there was a
old man
in this house in Forest Hills, that there was a safe deposit box from an old gangster, and he was breaking into that house to steal it. And then Uncle Ben spooked him and he shot him. He didn't mean to. He didn't mean to, Spidey. So that's, though he's not drawn as a buff rocker in his first appearance, he's more of like a scrawny, freckled, blonde dude.
Again, as Gary said, everyone has the same torso except for Aunt May and Mary Jane.
And she's hiding some secret torso under that robe.
No,
they made the torso smaller.
Hourglass, literally just cinched in her entirety.
And this flashback also, I think, captures what it is, I think, that always appealed to me about Spider-Man, is that he is fueled by guilt. Guilt. He can't.
Yeah.
He always feels guilty and like I could have done more. Why didn't I do it? I let everybody down. He just has all these neuroses on top of him. Superman doesn't think about that stuff. Batman thinks about old problems.
Yeah. Well, I remember, the website CBR. I remember reading, and I can't attribute this. I don't know what you guys do for show notes, but I remember reading an essay where a guy had a Batman pitch, and his argument, and it kept getting rejected by DC, and his argument was, the reason why Batman's origin is not as good or as thematically meaningful as Spider-Man's is because Batman doesn't feel guilty. So what if we did another showing of this and we had some kind of thing where, like, young Bruce insisted they go down the alley, or young Bruce insisted, against his, add an element of guilt, because it's so powerful, right? Like, as much as we're kind of clowning on this show, like, and I'm not half the Spider-Man fan you are, I do think that that origin is fantastic. I think it's a really good superhero origin.
Well, and every origin afterwards copied it. They're like, oh, we gotta put a lot of guilt into this. Like, DC did reformat some, Green Lantern and Flash. They got new origins that were like, well, he can't just have had a happy childhood. His mom had to be murdered. Or he can't just have a happy childhood. He has to see his dad die in an explosion.
Even that, though, that feels like a crude understanding of it. Like, it's not just about tragedy. It's about setting up a framework in which it makes sense for adventure to happen. Like, Spider-Man isn't just good because he wants to be good. He's good because he understands, firsthand, the most important person to him in his life died because he wasn't. It's pretty powerful and complete.
I agree.
Yeah.
Bob, I think he actually remembers it all in real time because he just immediately jumps back onto Detective Lee's car. He's like, oh, hey, you were just talking about me?
Having a flashback. I'm sorry.
Just him standing next to the mailbox, just staring with that torso.
Not to dwell on this too long, but I mean, if they had more time for this flashback, they could have given him motivation. Like, why was he so callous about stopping the criminal? That was not really explained to me.
It's interesting though, because we were talking about his origins as a Steve Ditko creation, fuck you, buddy, I got mine.
Yeah,
is really and he's kind of in the face of that. I'm just here to do a thing. Like, you take care of yourself.
The altruism of Spider-Man is against Randian philosophy, I will say. Though that's, maybe that's Stan Lee's influence too. Well, that's why when Steve Ditko started doing his own comics later, they're about murderous, insane people who are just like, you sinned once, you are dead. There's good and there's evil, and you did evil.
They were like Saw movies.
Yeah, pretty much, except he thinks they're the good guys. Another hilarious one he did when Ditko went to DC in the 70s, he created these characters called Hawk and Dove, which were very much in the Vietnam era of just there is Hawk, who is it's brothers. There's Hawk, who is the aggressive but not entirely super smart guy who's like, you got to do action. Come on, look at all these stupid kids on campus complaining. And then there is Dove, who is a effeminate nerd who's just like, I don't know. There's a reason that when they later did remakes of it, that Hawk stayed a man, but Dove became a woman, because it was just the more feminine role, and it was just a way for Ditko to make fun of all these milksops complaining about the Vietnam.
They're all known from a Ben Garrison cartoon.
R.I.P. Steve Ditko. Steve Ditko is one of the most important creators in my life, but I don't think we would agree on anything.
I think, not to get too dark, but I think he didn't have any friends, and they found his body long after he died because there was just nobody in his life. So very sad.
It got confirmed a week after his death because somebody called the police of like, hey, do you have this body? Have you seen this guy? They're like, oh yeah, we found his body. He was alone. Like, wow. That's sad. Yeah. And it is partially that Stan Lee stole credit of being the creator of Spider-Man, but Steve Ditko refused to make any media appearances ever for 50 years. He wouldn't do it.
I also blame Ayn Rand.
Yeah. She broke his brain, man. So they go to do some research. Apparently detectives in New York are the only people with access to Google in 1995. But that's when they search Brooklyn Bridge and Spider-Man. And that's when Spider-Man finally remembers what happened in the origin of Mysterio.
The special effects man had hidden it up there without getting a permit. He wanted an even bigger explosion. It was his fault the copter went down, and he'd have gotten away with it if I hadn't caught him.
They'll arrest me for this, and it's all because of you. I will get you, I swear.
This is something you have trouble remembering?
Hey, I hear that kind of thing 2-3 times a week.
His name was Quentin Beck. He got a year in jail for his crime.
That Beck's address? Wonder Studios?
Yeah, but
That clinches it.
Who are you, the narrator?
I love that line that she says, like, you don't remember this?
Yeah,
He swore revenge on you. It's like, well, that does happen all the time.
I
Spidey.
like how Spider-Man is sticking his nose into the business of movie stunts safety.
Production, yeah. It's funny. There's a bunch
This
of
is
funny
way
things
bigger
about
than
that.
the permit allows. No, sir.
And it's like his origin, but not his origin as to why he just wanted a big dangerous explosion.
Yeah.
Like his origin, he's actually a huge dickhead, and that's his origin.
He's
But he
like-
also just got caught. You know, like
You caught me. I'll be going to jail. Like, who cares? Thwip.
Yeah.
There's some really good webbing animation in this that they just the way he shoots the web out, it looks really fluid in some shots. Like, that's when you see some of the TMS flair around the rest of the trash in the show. But it's also, speaking of how well the police filmed it, they filmed that helicopter attack very well, the police
Like
did.
Michael Bay.
I mean, maybe they got it from the filming of it, but and then also J. Jonah Jameson gets a fax in his limo sending him to Wonder Studios, which I have to say, the many things that are ridiculous in this, an editor-in-chief writing an article, I just like, no, or publisher even, no way. But that's Jonah. He's in his limousine going to film something. He's like, I still gotta write. I have to write it. I can't even delegate this. I have to write. How bad
It's very
Spider-Man
hands-on.
is. Spider-Man's been dead, and he's like, and Mysterio, again, I must restate, the greatest hero
great.
has ever gone.
Mysterio, still great.
His
There's your headline.
just instant loyalty, immediate loyalty. It is, again, very Springfieldian that this is all happening.
And so then Spidey goes into the Wonder Studios. He finds all the stuff, including his like magic cubes, as well as the suction cups, which that is how he does it in the comic, but it makes even less sense here because like Spider-Man at some point during the video of the fake Spider-Man would have seen the giant suction cups on his feet.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
Those would have been there. But that's how he has it in the show too, and in the original comic too. Same with being able to copy his webbing, which, you know what, sell that too. That sounds like a pretty good
He's full
deal.
of things to sell.
And then Spider-Man confronts Beck.
I actually love this a lot.
Getting real tired of these fakes, Beck.
It's not all fake. Some of it is real. You decide which is which, if you can. Oh, I'll give you a little help. When you disappear, it won't be an illusion.
Hey, what is this, Beck? Carnival time?
That old expression. I specifically love him turning the chair around that Mysterio had painstakingly put a wolf, animatronic werewolf into, and just like, you're dressed like me now. And just like set him in his desk.
I don't know why I keep thinking of The Simpsons. I'm very sorry, but that Carnival Time Running skeleton power. I will not mention The Simpsons again. I'm sorry.
That reveal of the wolf actually, was one where the terrible animation helped it because I just thought it was badly animated, but then when you see it's an animatronic that can't really move, you're like, oh, it's intentionally stiffly animated.
I thought it was a real werewolf, and I was like, there are 4 minutes left.
Oh, yes.
You're introducing real werewolves to me?
Oh, baby.
I'm ready for this.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
And it is peak Mysterio to be threatening Spider-Man from a control room. I just read a new comic where he does that. So it is classic. And it also at the same time he captures Lee and Jonah, who head over to Wonder Studios, which if Spider-Man villains predominantly operate out of abandoned things, like there was a film studio that big in New York City, I don't believe it. Not in the 90s. But the Spider-Man gets attacked again, and this is some of my favorite Spidey quips in this episode.
Next time I'll stick to the pony rides. So why is my spider sense going crazy? Great. Now I've stepped into a Ray Harryhausen movie. Maybe it's more like Roger Corman. Let's see how real you are. Well, that's Hollywood for you. Gruff exterior, but underneath it all, a heart of aluminum.
Thwips and quips.
Yeah, Spidey has all the quips. I like those references. And as a nerd in 1994 who was watching MST3K, I knew who Roger Corman and Ray Harryhausen were. So I got those references. And but that's so direct. I feel like they wouldn't have done that in earlier Spider-Man cartoons of like literally saying famous directors of horror films.
They probably would think kids won't get that. They won't know what that is.
And kids wouldn't get that.
Yeah.
Like what 12-year-old in the 90s had heard of Roger Corman? fun. Though, actually, at the time he was making fun of Roger Corman, he had just made the Fantastic Four film that no one was allowed to see, as everyone learned about in Arrested Development Season 4. But I also like Spidey's commentary. It feels very like the writers, and they're like, that's Hollywood for you. Like, it's all phony. When Mysterio captures Spider-Man in a web, he's like, pretty ironic, huh?
Yeah.
And he's like, you planned this.
Yeah.
You're just being a
There's
dick.
nothing ironic about the dozens and dozens of hours you spent setting this up in the hope that I would do this.
I just finished building both spiders. This is so great.
Yeah.
And also another hole in Mysterio's poorly thought out plan. Why is he trying to kill J. Jonah Jameson and a detective when it's like, you just kill Spider-Man. This guy is your biggest fan. Don't kill him.
Yeah, I think he just needed hostages and the only people he knows who are connected to Spider-Man at all. You know, like Spider-Man doesn't have any allies. It doesn't make it good though, because at the end when he gets them and he makes the duplicates of himself, he makes the 6 duplicates. Like, I played enough D&D to know that sometimes you roll a 1. You know, he's just kind of banking on Spider-Man. You know, those aren't super good odds.
No.
Like, he has a 5 out of 6 chance of not killing me. Wahaha.
That was like a last minute plan of his, I think. He's like, oh, well, you were supposed to die. But I also enjoy these Mysterio threats here.
Time for the cavalry to arrive, isn't it? Well, they're here.
Mysterio, they don't have anything to do with this. Let them go. Well, Jameson you can keep, but...
Enough! It's payback time.
Payback? For what? You did it all to yourself.
Yes, that's what my psychiatrist said. But you know what? His sessions never made me feel this good.
I like that line.
It's a cute joke. I wanted Jameson to be like, why aren't you dead? I thought you were dead.
I wrote you were dead.
Jameson's gonna need the psychiatrist. What if he was just weeping in the background for the whole rest of the time? He gets rescued.
No, Spider-Man's alive.
It ends with Mysterio in jail receiving a letter, like fan mail from Jameson.
And in a
Give me pictures of you.
In a very convoluted way, Spider-Man saves himself by putting a web fulcrum on the thing they're hanging from, and they pull him out of it.
He pulls himself out of it. Like, he shoots it up to the net that the woman and Jameson are in, and she grabs it and ties it to the crane, and then he pulls himself up. Which is like, that's not very sticky, that web he was in. If he could just get out of it out of his own strength.
She shouldn't have been able to disattach his web and tie it around something either. Like, once he splats it, it sticks. Like, I don't mean to sound gross there, but and another thing I caught in this is like, Spider-Man, for no practical narrative reason, gets battle damage to his outfit, which does not happen normally. And I think I know the reason. It's another toy reason. In the first wave of Spider-Man toys, there was not just regular Spider-Man and Peter Parker, but battle-ravaged Spider-Man with a beat-up costume. Yeah.
That was really common. I remember that from He-Man, like from the early 80s.
The battle-damaged chest, and you click the chest.
Click it, and it flips around. They get progressively more battle damaged. Yeah,
I had the one of him and Skeletor like that, and it was but eventually their Turner thing, as listeners will find out, my parents bought me a lot of toys. Like,
true.
I had too many toys. I apologize. I'm sorry. I was a very spoiled kid. I had battle ravaged Spider-Man as well, but so that's why I think his suit got beat up. But yes, in classic Mysterio fashion, once Spider-Man gets through all of those tricks, it's one and done for old Beck. I also love hearing him say, like, hey, this is between you and me, Beck. Beck, what are you doing? Like, knowing the musical
Where is it
star,
at, Beck?
You've got the devil's haircuts.
I'm going to redefine your sex crimes, Beck.
Time for the grand finale. Which of us is the real one? By the time you figure it out, it'll be too late.
One chance. I gotta trust my spider sense. Just close my eyes and...
What do you think of your big hero now?
Just get me out of this thing.
Did I hear a please?
Guess that's a wrap.
I get it.
It's a movie reference. That's pretty much how he beats him in the comic too, though. It's actually a more exciting fight in the comic because he fights Mysterio on active film sets. They fight through
like the end
a
of Pee Wee
Mars
Herman.
set. Yeah,
I love that when that happens.
It's a lot of fun, and they would also later rewrite that Quentin Beck worked for. He posed as an alien before he met Spider-Man in a separate Spider-Man plot as well.
Do all of the villains have this much fun at their jobs in Spider-Man?
I don't think the
really.
Demi-Goblin has had fun one day in his life.
Okay, I'll take your word for it.
Electro, he just likes stealing cars, and he's like, "I'm electric, whatever." Like, he's not. That's what I like
his
about Electro.
catchphrase? I'm electric. You figure it out.
So Spidey has saved the day. The Daily Bugle has to retract it and say Spider-Man cleared of all charges, which I don't know. If I'm Mysterio, I'd still say like, hey, you know what? You can't prove I'm Spider-Man. Maybe that was Spider-Man doing that stuff. Why are you putting this on me?
Editorial on the same page. Mysterio still good? Question mark.
Look, I'm saying both sides are wrong in this Spider-Man Mysterio debacle. But Spider-Man gets one more chance with old MJ.
Still want help with your physics?
Nay, good sir. To paraphrase an ancient playwright, she who learns must study. So I did, and I passed my test.
Congratulations.
Thanks. My class is in here. Gotta run. But you know, physics is a lot like theater. I get it now. It's all about making sense out of life. Once I realized that, it was easy.
Yeah, I get it now too. Thanks for helping me make sense out of my life, Uncle Ben. Spider-Man's life too.
Unearned sympathy.
I do love that. Speaking of the fast paced of it, they're just like, hey, you're right, Mary Jane pulls that photo. Also, you too, Uncle Ben. That was my feeling earlier. Goodbye.
Now, back in the wallet with you.
Well, and you could hear a tiny bit there in the clip, like a little bit of the credits gets in there because that's how quickly it ends. It's
We
just
gotta
like,
go.
It's just like, and for Spider-Man 2.
Yeah, I gotta say, I don't really know a lot about Spider-Man, and I thought this was a bad cartoon going into it. I was actually impressed by the writing, and like you said, Henry, there's a lot of work put into the voice acting too. If only they had more money. Maybe I would be a Spider-Man fan today. That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm a Batman fan because of the cartoon. And I'm not even a huge Batman fan. I just love the cartoon so much.
Yeah, I was already a Spider-Man convert, but this was a great show to watch while I was at the height of my Spider-Mania as a child. It holds up in some ways, very much so, not in others. I want to watch now the Spectacular Spider-Man show because I hear that is the best one. It was show run by Greg Weisman, who did Gargoyles.
Oh,
and it looks like it's actually animated well. And partially one of the best things about it is that Spider-Man has fewer lines on his costume, so I think they can get him to do a whole lot more. But anyway, fits and starts. It holds up really well and also does not.
Yeah, and that's like, I would extend that to most of the Marvel stuff that I've seen. You know, where it's like, I like the plotting in those, and it's also impossible to separate though, and it's also a fool's errand to try to separate like how much of it is just more affection for the characters. You know,
totally.
like you, Bob, I would not have been into Batman if it wasn't for the cartoon, really. But every other kind of DC animated series I've tried to watch, I don't care about Green Lantern. Why would I care about Green Lantern?
I've only liked the Batman one. I can't watch. I mean, I appreciate what they're trying to do, and I like how the look is the same. But I feel like they're stealing valor, if you will, from Batman TAS,
which should be illegal.
Yes.
The Superman show is good.
Oh, Superman, I will give. I mean, it was made in that same era by a lot of the same people.
Most of the same people.
Yeah.
I just have a hard time with like the characters, and I think like the character stuff is what comes across in these kind of subpar production like Marvel shows. You know, like I think Spider-Man's a really strong character. I think Mysterio is not a super strong character, but he comes back and gets more development, and like you get a lot more of that kind of backstory. It's not that Batman didn't do that, but it's harder for me to care about like Starro or the, you know, Toyman or things like that. Like these are just, I think they're just kind of better characters, and that's what, you know, the appeal is. And the plotting is really good, like across episodes, like the, you know, those multi-episode arcs. Like I was clowning on Secret Wars as being inaccurate, but it's like a good little series of cartoons.
Yeah.
Like, it's pretty fun.
No, and I loved as a kid seeing that, like, oh, this is chapter 4 of the season 3. I'm watching these in order. I'm learning.
And I bet every one of those has a previously on Spider-Man. And
Absolutely.
It's 45 seconds. They don't have to animate again.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening, folks, and thanks to Gary Butterfield for being our special guest. Gary,
Hey.
you're on many podcasts. You've got your own network. Talk about it. Where can we find you and all of your stuff?
I do, and I am. So listeners of this show, the animation related thing we do is a show show called Days of Future Cast I do with my friend Jeremy Greer. Started off as an almost episode by episode exploration of the X-Men animated series, but we have hence moved on. We've done a couple Spider-Man things. We've done the X-Men movies. We are now doing a terrible Avengers from the 1999. But we're going to do the Spider-Man cartoon. Watching this really made me think that we're going to do that. So, check us out there for cartoon things. That show, like all my shows, is on duckfeed.tv. You can check us out if you want to support us. That is at patreon.com/duckfeedtv. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can do it at GaryBuh, GaryBuh. And it's like a third jokes and a third serious thoughts about games, and then a third like just raging about how awful and hell world this is. So it's equal parts. You get a little bit of everything.
I'm signing up for Hell World.
Yeah, it's a bento box of misery at twitter.com.
Thank you so much, Gary.
Yes.
As for us, we also have a Patreon, and you can give to more than one. It's totally legal.
No one will stop you.
No one will stop you. So if you go to patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons, that is what funds all of the stuff that we do. It's how Henry and I live. It's our full-time salary, basically. So if you want to support the show, if you like what we do, sign up at the $5 level. You'll get every episode of this podcast a week ahead of time and ad-free, along with Talking Simpsons a week ahead of time and ad-free. And also, all of our exclusive bonus podcasts will be there. Series like Talking Critic, Talking Futurama, interviews with animation legendaries, all kinds of stuff going on there. Henry, what is the most recent, as of this recording, bonus thing that we have there that people should be excited about?
Well, we had our Simpsons Season 7 wrap-up, where we went through all the biggest news that happened during Season 7, as well as the deleted scenes. We had our interview with Mike Reitz, who had worked on The Simpsons for 30-plus years. And we had, for What a Cartoon, I keep forgetting to mention this, our exclusive What a Cartoon episode about One Piece.
That's right. And one of our artists for the network, Maddie Kopp, joined us for that one, and the home movies episode of What a Cartoon, too.
Yeah.
So if you like that one, we talked for about 45 minutes about One Piece, and we will break you into its 21-year legacy and why you should care about it. So please go to patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons, and if you sign up right now and you never have signed up before, there will be like dozens and dozens and dozens of things you've never heard. We've been doing this for over a year now, and they make it super easy. Once you sign up, you get a little code. You plug that into whatever you use to listen to podcasts, and it will download them automatically, just like all your normal podcasts. So it's totally painless, and you will have access to so many podcasts with us you haven't heard before. As for me, you can find me on Twitter as Bob Servo. I have another podcast, and that is Retronauts. It's a classic gaming podcast. Every Monday, go to retronauts.com or look for Retronauts in your podcast machine. We've been doing this since 2006, folks. There's got to be a topic you care about. I recommend you search the archives, find one you like, and if you like it, then subscribe to us. It's really fun. I love subscribing to things. Henry, where can we find you?
I'm at HenryYG on Twitter. I share a lot of Spider-Man thoughts on there, as well as announce when we have new stuff going on in the Patreon or on What a Cartoon or Talking Simpsons. And I also am tweeting about Hell World as well. And so follow me there on Twitter.
Thank you so much for joining us, folks. We'll see you next week for another superhero, Darkwing Duck, and the episode is Life, the Negaverse, and Everything. We will see you then.
The red button. I'll bet my web shooter that's the emergency shutdown. Trust me, it's always the red button.
How do you know about stuff like this?
Hey, who do I look like? The Tick?